we are excited to have you to all join us today for our webinar titled Sustainability Reporting, Navigating Trends, Technology, and Best Practices. The webinar will last for 1 hour. During our discussion, we are going to discuss 4 topics. First, we will look at the recent trends in sustainability reporting. Second, we will explore the use of technology in sustainability reporting. Next, we will then talk about the connection between corporate governance and sustainability reporting. Finally, we will discuss the carbon emissions. Now, let's meet our expert panelists who will be guiding us through these complex topics. First, we have Ms. Bong Yap Kim, the Senior Technical Director at ACRA's Sustainability Reporting Office. Ms. Bong is helping to set up a Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee to develop the roadmap to advance the sustainability reporting in Singapore. Her role and experience at ACRA offer us a comprehensive understanding of the subject. Next, we have Mr. Jonathan Zhong, the Group Chief Sustainability and Risk Officer at ComfortDelGro. Mr. Zhong's role involves balancing sustainable practices with effective risk management. His expertise in harnessing technology for efficient governance and sustainability tracking will no doubt bring an invaluable perspective to our discussion. Finally, please welcome Ms. Lauribeth Belgius. As a Senior Manager in Mergers and Acquisition Tax at Deloitte, Ms. Belgius has a deep understanding on how tax governance fits within a wider ESG frameworks. Her insight into the tax transparency and corporate responsibility are sure to add a unique angle to our discussion. As we navigate our webinar today, I encourage you to engage fully with the panel discussion and look at any question that you might have. If time permits, we might take a few questions toward the end during the Q&A sections. So without further ado, let's dive into these 4 topics and hear from our expert panelists. Welcome, Ms. Bong, Mr. Zhong, and Ms. Belgius. So the first question is for Mr. Zhong. Sustainability and operational efficiency are increasingly integral to business strategies. How is ComfortDelGro adapting to this trend and finding the right balance? Maybe could you bust some common myths for us about the relationship between these 2 areas? And in light of the ever-evolving sustainability landscape, are there any best practice that you think firms generally overlook and should have done more?
Thank you, Prof. And thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having me. So yeah, I think we talk about some of the common myths first of sustainability. One of the common things I hear mentioned is that sustainability is quite expensive, or we can't afford it, or someone's got to pay, we can't be profitable. And I think this is one view where to a certain extent there is a certain upfront cost sometimes when we think about sustainability. But I always think of sustainability less of a cost and more as an investment. So if we think about, for example, investing in more energy efficient equipment, or one of the common things these days is looking at renewable energy sources such as solar. There is an upfront cost. You need to usually do some retrofitting. You need to invest in some capex. But if you think about solar, for example, we are harnessing really electricity from the sun. And once you set this up, of course, there's some maintenance, but then you get to then offset your electricity use, and this could be over quite a long period of time. So you can do your calculations to see whether these things are cost efficient for you. But I think more importantly, when you start thinking about your business in the long run, how do we transform our business to one which is more long-term sustainable? Can we carry on operating the same way that we have for many years? Is this actually the type of company that we will be operating? Is this the type of company which people want to do business with us? Is this the type of company where you can recruit new people into your company? Because things have changed and everyone is looking beyond sort of like your bottom line. They're looking for a sense of purpose. So I think when we look at sustainability, it's really not looking at it from a cost point of view, but looking at how we transform the business so you can attract new customers, you can attract new employees, and you can also reduce potentially some of your liabilities in the future because things are changing, and we all, I think, have to be better corporate citizens. Now, when we look at sustainability for ComfortDelGro, it's a little bit different because as a transport operator, I think we recognize that if we look at GHG emissions globally, greenhouse gas emissions, transportation actually accounts for somewhere around 1/4 to 2/5 of all the GHG emissions on our planet. So, when we look within the transport sector, I think more than half, somewhere around 2/3, 3/4 of the emissions are directly related to land transportation alone. So if we take out the shipping and the aviation, land transport operators, we are probably the main contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. So anyone who is playing in the land transport space, I think we do have to look at what the future looks like for us to continue operating. Can we continue operating the same type of fleets that we currently do today, or do we actually need to transform to make sure we can reduce that big proportion of emissions as a land transport operator? So I think that's one of the key things that we look at, is how do we transition our fleet to cleaner forms of vehicles, whether that is EVs, whether that's hydrogens, whether that's hybrid cleaner vehicles, and so on. When we look at sustainability, I think the E part, the environmental part, is very key. I think we often forget about the S and the G part, the social and the governance part. And that's really the part I think means the most to my company at ComfortDelGro. Over 20 years ago, ComfortDelGro was set up. One of the key reasons was actually to provide a livelihood and a service to move people in a safe and reliable way. And we continue to look after our people as a key value of our company. If you look at just a couple of years ago, when we were going through the lockdowns and circuit breaker stage, we actually waived a lot of the rentals for our taxis because we recognized that this is actually a time when a lot of people had uncertainty, and we needed to still move people around. Although we had all the social distancing and all the extra precautions in place, life still had to go on, and we have to make sure that the people can continue to earn a living, and people can still have a taxi service or a bus service in a safe way and be confident that they can continue with their lives. In the same way, when we look at our public bus service, we roll out a lot of initiatives such as travel buddy schemes. And this is really to make sure that passengers with disabilities can continue to travel on public transport with confidence. And this is all about making sure that public transport is accessible. So all our buses, all our trains and MRTs are wheelchair accessible. We make sure that people can actually access them in the same way like able-bodied people. And this is not just in Singapore, but on all our operations in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and so on. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to know that sustainability reporting is not necessarily a cost center, right? So Jonathan talked about it, which is pretty good. So now, next question, Ms. Belgius, considering recent trends, how has the importance of the tax transparency evolved as a significant factor in sustainability reporting? As you know, business increasingly align their tax governance with ESG frameworks, right? Could you illustrate some implication of the shift? How can ESG elements such as CO2 emission, water efficiency, or even renewable energy consumption influence tax governance and transparency?
Thank you so much for your question, Prof. Law. So I will be talking in light of your question about the trends, implications, and the linkages between ESG and tax transparency and tax governance. So first, as regards to trends, so there are actually 4 trends, at least from what we've observed, which shape the role of tax transparency in sustainability reporting. So the first would be we have observed that there have been public calls for tax transparency. And this is mainly due to the perceived abuses of the international tax system, and hence GRI, being an international ESG standard setting body, developed GRI standard 207. And this standard specifically focuses on tax transparency. It has a more qualitative approach, focusing on tax governance, control, and risk management, relationship with stakeholders, and even the qualitative approach on country-by-country reporting. And the World Economic Forum also has developed similar standards, which are more quantitative, focusing on tax contributions, such as the total tax paid and additional tax remitted. Secondly, we have observed how more tax authorities globally are now implementing tax governance and control and risk management programs. The IRS is one of them. Australia is also leading the way. In fact, Australia has a tax transparency code. Malaysia is also developing a similar framework. And then in relation to GRI 207. So GRI 207 is actually leveraging on existing frameworks of the OECD in that connection. So earlier I mentioned how GRI 207 also has a feature on country-by-country reporting. And in that respect, it can leverage on the OECD's transfer pricing country-by-country reporting. And a future trend that we can also foresee is broadening of GRI 207 to also include matters concerning base erosion profit shifting on Pillar 2. And then we are also observing more multinational enterprises adopting GRI 207 as part of their core metrics. In Singapore alone, actually, we have observed how 20% of the top 50 companies in terms of market capitalization are including such metric in their sustainability reports. And then with respect to implications, actually, of course, there is a tendency for the greenwashing, so to speak, of tax reporting, and even, but that is more reputational. Essentially, MNEs would like to be perceived as shifting away from the use of tax havens, and that they are not involved in any serious tax avoidance or tax evasion on that matter. And also, we have observed how heads of tax are now requested to participate even in sustainability initiatives. And earlier, before this session, we were also chatting about how tax professionals, even lawyers, are now engaging in ESG training as well. So there is also an implication that, or rather an expectation that tax can also now contribute to reasonable ESG ratings. But our advice to tax heads is to manage the expectations of their colleagues in the sustainability space on that note, because of course there are drivers in the tax metrics that are really driven by the business. Yeah. And then with respect to the influence of ESG elements such as CO2 emissions, and the like on tax governance and transparency, well, we could actually say that tax transparency and tax governance are actually tax agnostic, meaning they cover in principle all kinds of taxes, not just the ESG linked taxes, but so therefore there's no direct link, strictly speaking, between these two. However, when it comes probably to with respect to tax transparency, at least we can see there that, for example, if there is a business that has a lot of CO2 emissions, then we can see that there are a lot of carbon taxes along those lines. But we wouldn't really like, or rather the general public probably wouldn't really like a business with just a lot of carbon taxes.
That's great. It's good to know the tax transparency is kind of like fit into the sustainability reporting. I think in academic world, a lot of people also try to understand what's the connection between the country by country tax reporting and then sustainability reporting, which is great. Okay, now let's hear some perspective from the regulator. Okay, so the next question is for Ms. Bong. ACRA and Singapore Exchange regulations have recently set up the Sustainability Reporting Advisory Committee to develop the roadmap to advance sustainability reporting by Singapore companies. Could you share some insight into how global development in ESG have influenced the proposed roadmap? What are the challenges anticipated in rolling out the proposed roadmap?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Maybe before I start going into the details, maybe let me give a bit of background about ACRA and what we are doing in this space. I think a lot of people think that ACRA is just a registrar of companies. That means we requires companies to file and etc. But actually, ACRA's role extends beyond itself. We are actually the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority in Singapore. So we do regulate, do a lot of enforcement on accounting standards, auditing standards, and etc. And more recently, because we have merged with Accounting Standards Council and also Singapore Accountancy Commission, we now have a committee that sets the accounting standards. And we also have an arm that is looking into capacity building of the accounting profession in Singapore. So because of the synergy in corporate reporting, financial between SR and financial reporting, we have been tasked by the Ministry of Finance to set up and develop a roadmap to advance mandatory sustainability reporting in Singapore. So the recommendation itself will cover both listed company and non-listed companies. It will be effected through legislations, and the recommendation will be out later this week. So do watch out for it. Now, let me go back to the question on how the global developments have influenced the development of the roadmap. The thing is that ESG is a space where the global developments are moving fast, very united, very rapidly changing. So if you have been reading the news, you have a overwhelming amount of information. But broadly, I can roughly maybe just cover three main developments. First, on the demand side for sustainability information. This one, we have actually noted a very concerted efforts among the investors, lenders, and consumer driving the sustainability agenda to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement. So essentially, if I can quote some statistics, because the numbers are really huge, and that is affecting our Singapore companies. It's like we have 550 financial institutions, banks essentially, with 152 trillion US dollar in assets. They have committed to steer the global economy towards net zero emission, and more importantly, facilitated by credible, decision-useful climate data. Okay, on the investment side, we have over 5,000 investors that have signed up to the Principle for Responsible Investment. And they represent and be managing 122 trillion of assets, okay? And they have committed to incorporate ESG issue in their investment decision, and more importantly, also to seek ESG disclosure by the entities they invest. So what does this mean is that they will make their decision based on ESG data. And of course, these are actually driving the demand for the information. Then on the supply side itself, things are warming up in the sense that the C-suite are warming up towards the idea of sustainability reporting. In the most recent last year report by KPMG, they interviewed more than 1,000 global CEO across 11 markets on their 3-year outlook. Actually, and 45% percentage of the global CEO agreed that ESG program actually improved financial performance. And this is up from 37% 1 year ago. So within 1 year, the number just changed. So hopefully next year it will be a majority. The next one is that they also noted that companies embracing ESG are better able to secure talent, strengthen proposition, and etc. So now we have demand and we have a supply. So the question is you need to bridge and match. And that essentially what we are looking forward to is the convergence of the standards itself. So this regrettably will take a while to sort out because, currently internationally people are still setting their own standard and we haven't quite get a conversion, but hope is on the horizon. So in particular, last week, the ISSB have issued 2 reporting standards. I think you can't miss it because it's all in the media and well covered in all aspects. And the IOSCO, which is the international body of the securities regulator, they're actually working on the assessment of the standard for implementation. In Singapore side, we are aware that many listed companies are using GRI, but these companies can be comforted that also IFRS Foundation has signed the MOU with GRI to make the standards interoperable. So you can actually interoperate, use both concurrently. On the assurance side, we have the international standard sector, IAASB, that actually will be issuing a consultation on the new sustainability assurance standards. And we also recently have the ethical standards side that help the roundtable about what are the standards to go forward. So these 2 standards are quite unique because they are meant to be profession agnostic. It means it can be applied beyond audit firms in that sense. And that's actually quite relevant to Singapore because we actually have a lot of non-audit firms providing assurance in this space. I'm afraid my answer is a bit too long for the first one. Do you still want me to continue for the challenges? Yeah, do you?
I think it's good. I think it's good. So it's good to know how this global trend kind of shape the local policy in Singapore. That's very good. So now let's switch the gear. Let's talk about the technology. I think a lot of people also interested in technology in the sustainability context. Maybe let's start with Jonathan first and get some industry perspective on this. So Mr. Zhou, so ComfortDelGro has a substantial global footprint, which means a diverse range of sustainability performance metrics to track, like bioblend, diesel consumption, petrol usage, greenhouse gas emissions. How do you leverage technology to manage these varied data points and compile a sustainability reports for your diverse businesses? On top of that, could you share your experience of using technology to balance carbon reduction, fleet optimization, or like even ensuring customer satisfaction and safety? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think there are 2 parts to this question when we talk about technology. One is perhaps the use of technology for reporting. And then the second part is perhaps the use of technology to optimize or reduce or improve our operations. When we talk about reporting, for ComfortDelGro, we are a transport operator which operates across 7 different countries, but we have a lot of subsidiaries. I think at last count, we have close to almost 100 subsidiaries. So if you imagine with the disclosure requirements and reporting, we actually have to aggregate data, ESG data across all our subsidiaries. This is quite a big challenge. I mean, before you talk about things like petrol consumption and the different types of fuel that we use, if you think of something as simple as workplace safety, when we disclose about injuries, the way you report typically an injury in Singapore context under MOM is like if you have an injury which requires you to take 3 days or more MC, for example. Whereas in UK, it might be a different definition, or in Australia and China and so on. So how do you consolidate all these numbers and then you provide one number in your sustainability report? That's quite a challenge. How do you make sure all the subsidiaries understand what they are reporting and they report it in a way which is correct? So we talk about things like workplace safety, even trying to calculate your employee count. Do we include contract workers? Do we include non-permanent staff? Do we include seasonal workers and so on? These are all seemingly very simple things, which actually from a sustainability reporting perspective, when you try to put the data together, it's very, very difficult. So I think there are quite a few platforms, solutions out there to help with this data aggregation, to help with this journey of definitions, to help with things like, if you have this type of fleet, what is the emission factor from either like DEFRA or GHG protocol and so on, to take some of these challenges out. but I think the Sustainability Office still need to make sense of the data. Does this electricity bill look correct for this type of use? You know, do we have gaps in some of the information and so on? The technology tools, I think, can assist with this. I think the other angle of this is also the requirements to assure the data. And I know for Singapore, assurance is starting to become a bit more mandatory. First, internal assurance, and then subsequently, I think everyone is encouraged to get external assurance. And I think when the new regulations come in by ISSB, the sustainability report will become closer to like our annual report, where we need to make sure all the data is properly assured. We will get there. I think the question is, you know, first, do we all understand all the different metrics that we need to disclose? Particularly if we look at GHG, we use emission factors based on some of these global acceptable factors, but our fleet in Singapore, for example, may be quite different to the type of fleets that we use in the UK. So, you know, at the moment, we're using a lot of assumptions. I think countries need to start to produce their own localized emission factors for different types of data. And then we can start to make more sense of the data that we have and track the journey that we are making. If I touch on operations, for example, this is where I think things can start to make a difference. I mean, beyond an angle from emissions, if we look at how we use data analytics in some of our vehicles, we can track things like fuel consumption, we can analyze driving habits, the amount of idle time that you have, the types of driving behaviors. These will in a way help, for example, make you a better, safer driver. It will also reduce your emissions if you are not idle a lot of the time, or if you're not accelerating, you know, too aggressively and so on. And this will also, you know, make the journey a little bit more comfortable, perhaps. And of course, the types of technology you have in passenger cars these days, you know, we have things like the driver support systems. They can give you collision warnings. They can give you emergency brake if you're getting towards the vehicle in front too closely. So all this is starting to also either provide the drivers with better warnings or automatic response to really try to enhance the safety of the passengers as well as the driver and reduce accidents. I want to touch a little bit on some of our newer fleets. So in Singapore, ComfortDelGro provides the shuttle bus services in campuses such as NTU and NUS. So if there are those of you who have visited the NTU campus and have taken the bus to go around, you realize all the buses now in the NUS and NTU campuses are fully electric. We are also rolling it out to some of the medical hospitals in Singapore as well. Now, the new electric buses comes with things like, you know, fully wheelchair accessible and telematic systems. You can charge your phone in the bus. But more interestingly, it also is fitted with a host of data collection type of technologies. So if you are a user of the bus in these campuses, you will be able to tell where are the buses, how long is your waiting time, things like that. But more importantly, we as the operator can tell how many people are waiting at the bus stop, what are the routes that you're taking, you know, how should we run our timetable and our fleets to make sure we reduce waiting times. We send a bigger bus, for example, when there's more people who need it, or we don't run the bus if there's no one really waiting at the bus stop. So all this helps to reduce waste. You know, if we don't need to run a big bus, we almost make it a bit more of a on-demand service. So, you know, we get a lot closer to the demand and the need. And this also makes the customer journey a lot more comfortable. It reduces your waiting time. You can tell when the bus is coming, so you don't wait at the bus stop for too long. And through this and optimization and analytics, we can get a lot closer to actually providing that level of customer experience, which perhaps is going to become the norm in the future. Thank you.
That's great. It's good to know that using technology can help track those sometimes really difficult to measure kind of like performance metrics like workplace safety. Okay, so now let's hear some perspective from the regulator. So Ms. Bong, AI and other technology advancement are transforming every aspect of business operation, including reporting. So could you share somehow emerging technology may influence sustainability reporting and assurance in Singapore? What are some potential opportunities or even challenges that you foresee in this area for regulatory oversight and enforcement processes?
Okay, thanks for the question. I must admit I'm not an expert in technology, but I guess I can share some related encounters. What happened is that in February this year, when ChatGPT suddenly everybody is talking about, right, etc., I chanced upon this article in Eco Business, and the title is saying that will ChatGPT write our future ESG reports? So what happened is that the author has asked ChatGPT how it can help to increase transparency of sustainability reporting for companies. And ChatGPT replied in a very systematic way, listing 5 ways. But actually, the one that caught my attention is how to detect greenwashing. It even explained how it would do that, and logical answer, right? Let me read it out. It said that ChatGPT can be trained on large amount of text data. Okay, you all know that. But the angle is that to identify pattern of language that are commonly used in greenwashing campaigns. So I guess it's the pattern detector. And it can also analyze the context in which these words are used to identify misleading or false claims. So my team has yet to experiment on this using live samples disclosure in Singapore. But if there are any professors here who are keen to explore with ACRA, please contact me. And the second part is that the reason that why give me the confidence to explore, and I do think that there is a possible use cases, is mainly because ACRA has been applying machine learning technology to detect non-compliance with accounting standards today. So just to give a background, because numbers, we are all accountants, we love numbers. So ACRA received a filing of 80,000 financial statements per year. So it's not quite feasible for our reviewer to review every set of financial statements, but we do need a mechanism to flag out things that we ought to pay more attention to. Concurrently, we have been requiring a lot of companies to file financial statement in XBRL format. So what this means is that we have a lot of bite-sized machine-readable data over the years to do risk profiling. Okay, so we started first with a model to detect undisclosed insolvency risk. The reason is because due to COVID at that time, we were quite, this one of our top concerns in the sense if you have insolvency risk, company need to disclose it to the shareholders. We then progressed to detect non-recognition of impairment loss and etc. So we will continue to build more models. This is part of our plan to build something larger, what we call an integrated and continuous monitoring system. What we want to achieve is as and when financial statements are filed, the system will automatically run a series of the risk profiling risks. It will then filter out those with non-compliances, and it gets automatically routed to our officers' workspace to work on in that sense. So benefits, it will pivot ACRA towards a more risk-based supervision approach. It will, more importantly for our investigators, it will make their work more timely, more optimal, focusing on those that matter. So that's on the regulation side. On the audit side, we do know that, in fact, I came also across this article in Accountancy Age. So like Jonathan mentioned, there will be more and more assurance expectations on the sustainability reports. And of course, the audit profession is also transforming itself and to cope with the demand for credible information. Because of that, but they did note that unlike financial reporting, we are working on a very compressed timeline to train enough talents into our market. Not just in number, but also the required expertise. So there was this EY global leader that was covered here to say that AI-assisted assurance can address market capacity shortage in the sense that they are the firm, at least for according to this global climate change leader in Ernst & Young, the firm has started investing very significantly in the use of AI and machine learning to help analyze where they saw problems or inconsistency. So I guess they will develop from there, and it's no different than financial reporting, that one day such emerging technology will be quite a prevalent use for sustainability reporting and assurance. Okay, thanks.
That's good to know. It's actually it's interesting to hear that the ACRA is looking at the textual information, because I have done some work in this area. Actually, there's a lot of information on the textual analysis. For example, there's some research findings showing the use of the extreme language, like always or like never, this kind of extreme language. Or sometimes when they know that something they got it wrong, they tend to use the wording of we do this, we do that. So kind of like a lot of hints in this textual analysis actually hint that something is going on. But it's good to know that. So now
I thought you're offering your help to do the research.
No, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to help soon. Yeah. So okay, now so let's switch a little bit back to the tax side, because you know, in the taxation world, there's a lot of talk about using technology in the taxation kind of like consulting, or in terms of the sustainability reporting in a larger context. So Ms. Belgers, given we are on the topic, maybe we talk about this connection here. Technology is playing a ever increasing role in enhancing tax governance, right? So could you expand on how technology has contributed to strengthening the link between tax governance and broader sustainability reporting, such as the one you mentioned earlier, the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative 207 taxation? On top of that, how can emerging technology support data management, and what could their impact on, let's say, country by country tax reporting? Ms. Belgers, I think the microphone, yeah. You forgot to turn it on. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So as I was mentioning earlier, thank you for your question. And to respond to that, I will be using the approach that Jonathan used. So I will be answering in two parts. First is I will be focusing on the reporting aspect, on the measurement and reporting aspect in relation to GRI 207. And then I will be talking about the control framework, the broader control framework. Am I heard?
Yes.
Yeah. So with respect to GRI reporting, GRI 207.4 reporting, specifically on country by country tax transparency reporting. So I would say that there's no single tool which actually aligns reporting for that particular standard vis-a-vis the other GRI standards. But with respect to GRI 207.4, there's a range of technology tools which actually vary from the more traditional standardized approaches. Some, if a company is small, sometimes they just use Excel, and then of course the bigger the enterprise, there are more advanced technology and digital approaches, from the use of ERP systems to user insight and analytics. So say for example, there is a bigger multinational in several countries, and it has several entities at that. So the aggregation of data across countries in terms of tax reporting can indeed be a challenge. So which is why for that purpose, even for OECD's country by country reporting from a transfer pricing perspective, our teams are using tools such as Workiva and Anaplan. So these are specific tools that are actually highly customizable, and they can also be used for country by country reporting purposes for GRI 207.4. So it was Workiva, interestingly, was also used to measure Scope 1 to 3 emissions and related carbon taxes for another project. For another client, and some AI tools were used. For another, we used Intella. For another project, like we have a homegrown, Deloitte has a homegrown Workday tool. It's Accelerate to Zero, and it measures the carbon taxes and emissions, but from a global trade angle, from the exporters perspective. And then for country by country tax reporting, we also have tools such as data wranglers, which culls data from various reports globally. And then there are tools out there in the market such as CCH Integrator Reporting by Walters Kluwers. They essentially gather data, ensuring sufficiency, data quality. I think that's the more important thing, that there's proper documentation. And from the accounts, there's also a need to ensure that there's proper mapping and that the quality is indeed sufficient. From a control framework perspective, there's actually a very superior tool out there, that's SAP Tax Compliance. So various ERP systems have very good modules from a tax reporting and even ESG reporting perspective. And these modules can actually be used as GRC tools as well. So they can be used for control tracing, documentation, risk management. They're actually pretty agnostic in that respect from a control framework. And it's for the purpose of just managing an organization's governance process. So there, yeah.
Okay, just a follow-up question. So you talk about these tax risk management. Can you briefly elaborate on how the tax governance framework and the tax risk management kind of integrate into the good corporate governance practices in the context of ESG? For example, how does the Singapore RAS tax governance program, those key pillars kind of enhancing this process briefly? Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you for your question. And actually, we were talking earlier about GRI 207. And of course, we don't want to just do greenwashing. So actually, compliance with IRS's tax governance programs is a way of substantiating the report. So it's actually demonstrating that there's substance behind the sustainability report, specifically with respect to GRI 207.3, which deals with the relationship of a taxpayer with tax stakeholders. And of course, the most important tax stakeholder would be the tax authority. So there you go, participation in IRA's tax governance programs. So in that light, IRAS currently has 3 voluntary tax governance programs. The first one is the tax governance framework. The second one is the tax risk management and control framework for corporate income tax, or what we call CTRM. And the other one is the assisted compliance and assurance program. And that's for GST, which is what we call ACAP. So TGF essentially focuses on tax controls and governance at a strategic level. So essentially, the concept is quite similar to corporate governance, wherein corporate governance ensures essentially that there's tone from the top. The board actually sets some governance policies and standards, and issues are escalated all the way to the board level, because the board of directors are essentially agents of stockholders in general with respect to running or governing a company. So it's also the same principle with respect to tax governance. So in the tax governance framework, the focus is at the strategic level, where the board of directors can essentially set the tone with respect to tax governance and tax risk management. And it is in that respect a sound part of corporate, an integral part, we could say, of sound corporate governance. It ensures that the board has sufficient awareness of tax governance policy and material tax matters at that. Even before they are reported in the audited financial statements, the material tax matters, it ensures that the board has has some hand as well in with respect to addressing some issues, or rather setting the policy and the approaches with respect to tax compliance and control. Meanwhile, with programs such as CTRM and ACAP, these focus at the operational level, which ensures that from the governance standpoint, from the strategic high-level standpoint, it trickles down. These strategies trickle down at the operational level, and that's for the purpose of establishing more robust internal controls and systematic risk management processes from a tax perspective, for the purpose of mitigating and also monitoring key tax risks. And there should also be ongoing review of the effectiveness of these internal controls and processes. So with that, actually, you don't just demonstrate compliance with GRI 207.3 as mentioned earlier, but GRI 207.1 is also addressed, and also GRI 207.2. GRI 207.1 is the standard which deals with tax governance. GRI 207.2 is that which deals with the tax control framework.
That's good. So we have about 10 minutes. Before that, we need to talk about the most important topic, which is the carbon emission. So we can't talk about sustainability without discussing it. So let's start with Mr. Zhong. Could you share ComfortDelGro's experience and challenges in managing carbon emissions? And because ComfortDelGro operates across various regions and each with unique carbon emission policy, how does your company harmonize these differences? Could you share some of the challenges your company encounters in managing carbon emissions?
Thanks, Prof. So yes, I mentioned previously that as a transport operator, we recognize that we do contribute significantly to the carbon emissions wherever we operate. This is why ComfortDelGro is actually we are the first mobility operator in the Southeast Asia region to actually commit and have our decarbonization plans validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTi. And this is in line with a 1.5 degree Celsius warming scenario. And what this really means is we have committed to reduce our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. It's about 54.6% reduction from our baseline year of 2019 to 2032. And I think there's also accompanying 60% reduction in our scope 3 for the emissions from the fuel and energy use. So essentially, this sets the group on a path to more than half our scope 1 and 2 and the scope 3 energy and fuel ones in the next 10 years. Now, this is a top-down target from the group. And like you said, trying to then align all the different operations across the globe is quite a challenge. Now, how we do this is we then start to track, by collecting the aggregate data from the baseline to know where we currently stand. And then we have two things I think that we try to lever on. One is for our public bus operations. We're really dependent on working together with the local governments to try to influence and operate a cleaner fleet. So we don't own a lot of the buses. So for example, in Singapore, LTA owns the buses that we operate, but we work with LTA and MOT, where I think in Singapore, the commitment is to move to EV buses. About 50% of our buses will be EV by 2030, and 100% will be cleaner energy by 2040. So we know from the public bus perspective where the governments where we operate, what their commitments are, and we work together with them to try to achieve that, make sure we can operate on these cleaner energy buses. And we're currently already trialing things like, in UK, we have 20 hydrogen buses where we're trying to make sure that we can actually operate different types of clean energy vehicles. When it comes to our private taxis, this I think is a slightly different challenge in that I think one is the availability of the taxi. So we have found the types of taxis which you can, on a single charge, operate for more than 300 kilometers, for example, so that it reduces the number of charges. But one of the key challenges is the time it takes to charge. It still takes about 45 minutes to do a fast charge. That 45 minutes has to have our taxi driver waiting for his vehicle to charge when he or she could be picking up a passenger. So you're really asking them to take the fair earning time to actually charge their taxis. It's a bit different to a passenger car where we can think about, when we are doing our weekly grocery shopping, where we can park our car for a few hours and then we can charge up, or we can charge overnight. So it's a little bit different. The other aspect is the availability of these fast chargers. They are very expensive to install, and the network, the power networks in Singapore can't actually provide that type of power everywhere. So it's going to take some time for a lot of upgrades to happen, so that you do increase the availability of these fast chargers around. We are also waiting for technology to catch up. So you will see in overseas, battery technology is improving, charging times are reducing, compatibility of chargers and batteries are also improving in certain jurisdictions. For example, in China, you then have things like battery swaps, where within a few minutes you can swap the battery in and out. I think that's taken off in a big way for motorcycles. The batteries are a lot smaller, but we're trying to look at when these will become more feasible for passenger cars as well. So, that is a bit of a waiting game, but, the planet can't wait. So we do our best to track it. In some of our operations, there are delays. In other of our operations, there's acceleration. And what we do as a sustainability office is we make sure on an aggregate basis, we are still, on our path to make sure we meet or beat the commitments that we've made, so that we can decarbonize our fleet and therefore contribute to a lower emission platform or transport operations.
That's good. So Ms. Bond, there has been increasing scrutiny on greenwashing in industry like aviation and the use of the carbon offset. How does the roadmap intend to handle these contentious practices? Can you share some hurdles in auditing a company's sustainability claims for the use by investor and the public?
Yeah, I'm going to keep the answer short because I think the time is up. But I think the question is that we have recognized that greenwashing is a term used by many and to describe a very broad topics beyond reporting and assurance. So just quoting back the example that you said about carbon offset. So on one hand, if you look at financial performance, some companies prefer to use that to achieve their emission reduction, meaning to kind of contain the exposure to the carbon taxes and other reasons. But to some stakeholders, the use of such offset is a practice to be frowned upon. For example, so the question is, when we come to a proposed roadmap and regulation, we always ask ourselves where to draw the line in that sense. So for the proposed roadmap, we at this juncture and also quite consistent with the way we have been putting in requirements into the company's Act and listing rules, the aim is really to deliver transparent, comparable, credible disclosures. So what we are trying to do is we give the disclosure out, or rather make the company disclose transparently, consistently. Then we let the conversation between the stakeholders to occur. So let me illustrate. So like, for example, what we will do under the roadmap is we will recommend the roadmap will recommend that companies should prepare sustainability reports using the same reporting standards. So like in the case where a company is using carbon offset or chooses to use carbon offset to reduce the emission, there will be a requirement requiring them to disclose the use, how much it is being used, for example. As to whether they should use in the first place, or maybe the quantum use is too little or too much, we will leave it to the company directors and shareholders, investors, to have those conversations and make their decisions accordingly. So that's what we will aim for in doing under the proposed roadmap. That said, one caveat though, we are aware that the regulations in certain jurisdictions have moved beyond, because the question is, from the disclosure itself, what should be the responsibility of the directors? So one particular one that may be of interest, I just quickly highlight, there is this proposed corporate sustainability due diligence directive that is under proposal right now. It's pretty contentious, but initially the position was quite aggressive, but recently it has been toned down. And the latest negotiated position include that directors have a duty of care to systemically integrate sustainability matters into their decisions. And for companies with more than 1,000 employees, okay, this is the data as of today, they continue to negotiate, so it may change in the future, but for companies with more than 1,000 employees, a proportion of the directors' bonuses also need to be linked to fulfilling sustainability obligation. So do not be alarmed, at least for now, definitely the proposed roadmap, which we are going to issue for consultation later this week, will not cover this. Yeah, I hope it helps. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. So one final question, Ms. Belgius, how can companies leverage tax governance initiative to enhance their carbon emission management to better align with the ESG strategy? We have around about a minute left, maybe, so we can answer that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to focus on more of like how can carbon intensity, how can scope emissions influence a company's tax strategy, and what's the interplay behind between those two elements. So firstly, I'd like to also share how when a company has high carbon emissions, for example, in a certain jurisdiction, in a certain locality, or with respect to a certain portion of its value chain, then perhaps the reports can trigger management decisions, can be used to influence management decisions towards supply chain pivots for more environment-friendly sourcing, as well as continuous improvements of an organization's value chain. And those shifts can actually trigger an entire realignment of the value chain, even a multinational or any corporation's legal entities pricing models, even as there are shifts in value creation. And tax being a strategic function which actually looks into or right across the entire business, which sees the whole picture, can be a good ally of sustainability professionals with respect to identifying the value or the shifts in the value created amidst these transitions. So with those shifts, there can actually be tax implications ranging from corporate tax shift, royalty and tax implications pertaining to IP management when it comes to management of certain intangibles in relation to the business. Whenever there are changes in sourcing from one country to another, of course, there's also a need to take a look at the global trade perspective and take a look at the corresponding duty and tax, indirect tax implications at that. And also there can be personal realignments across entities or even across countries, which can be a trigger for tax cross-border reporting, impacting permanent establishment, as well as employment taxes and tax incentives and that connection. So that's it essentially in a nutshell.
That's very good.
I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, it does. It's very good. So we got some Q&A, quite some number of Q&A questions from the audience, but unfortunately we just don't have enough time. But one question that I think a lot of people are interested in is like, what are the career opportunities for accounting and business students? Because I have a sense it's like really difficult to recruit people with such talent on the sustainability. Maybe the panelists can use 10 seconds to try to give your best thought on this area. Yeah. Jonathan, you want to go first? 10-second answer?
Yeah, just to share, I mean, every CV I see, not only are we looking at people with ESG understanding and awareness, but also the people looking for careers are asking us, you know, how as part of their career over here, how they can learn about ESG. So I think it works both ways. It's here to stay, and I think from a sustainability professional standpoint, that's where we expect things to be going.
Great. Ms. Bong?
Yeah, so I just share how serious government is taking into this issue about capacity building. Later part of actually this month, we are setting MTI, Ministry of Trade and Industry, together with SkillsFuture. They are actually setting up this committee called Green Skill Committee, mainly to drive the development of the green skills to kind of drive the sustainability agenda. In the case, there are 2 working groups that are being set up to look specifically to develop the skills plans. Essentially, skills plan means to coordinate what the universities are training and also what the professional bodies are training in order to meet the demand for all these talents. So one focus group is actually focusing on sustainability reporting and assurance. So it's actually also being co-chaired by ACRA as well. So just to share with you, if you look at how government plans for supply to kind of address the shortage in talents and everything, you can see that the opportunity is definitely there. Yeah.
Right. Ms. Belgers.
Yes, short answer. Take a look at the Deloitte careers page. And there are a number of openings there. There are also, I know that there are some internship positions as well as some permanent roles that are open. And there are several teams working on tax and sustainability. Our team, which handles tax governance and CTRM, is just one. There's also global trade. There's value chain alignment. There are various teams, and just take a look at there's in-house training and learning on the job.
That's great. That's great.
So trying to do recruitment, right, Beth? Yeah, she's trying to recruit.
Yeah, that's good to know. It's a huge demand for this track. That's really nice. So we are running out of time. We have a lot of questions on the Q&A. Apologies, I'm not able to go through them because we really run out of time. But I want to thank again for our 4 fantastic panelists: Ms. Boyap Kim of ACRA, Mr. Jonathan Jong of ComfortDelGro, and Ms. Lori Beth Belgers of Deloitte. So their insightful discussion contribution have helped us to learn a lot on this complex issue. So thank you once again for joining us today. By the way, there will be a short survey, probably take you 1 minute after this webinar. I'll be really grateful if you can stay behind to help us to fill it in. So see you next time and have a good day. Thank you.